Well, I think we all know what Jesus meant when he has them say in the parable, if they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not listen even if someone should rise from the dead. Of course, that's a direct reference to himself, that the Pharisees to whom he addressed this parable, even after he rose from the dead, they still wouldn't listen to him. But let's look a little bit more closely at this parable. And I have to be honest with you, this is the parable that I find the most uncomfortable to have to proclaim every year. It makes me squirm a little bit because I realize that there's a direct message for me in there. And I think if all of us are honest, we realize there's a direct message for all of us. This parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Now, traditionally, we call the rich man Divus, but Jesus doesn't name him. In fact, Divus is simply the Latin word for rich man. But we'll call him Divus. And why was Divus condemned in the story? He wasn't condemned because he was rich. He wasn't condemned because he wore purple clothing. In fact, to understand that, today we have artificial dyes, so a color in clothing doesn't make a difference. But back in Jesus' time, you had to find the dyes that you used through natural things. And purple was found only by grinding down the shells of very rare seashells. So therefore, it was a very expensive color to have. That's why only the emperor wore purple. It took a lot of money. So the fact that this man wore purple meant he was very wealthy and he was showing it off to everybody. Look how much money I have. We also don't hear that he made his money in any sort of underhanded way. We don't hear that he was a crook or a gangster or a loan shark or anything like that, or a manipulator of people. As far as we know, he was just a good businessman or farmer or whatever he did. He did his job well and he reaped a profit. And there's nothing wrong with any of that we've mentioned so far. There's nothing wrong with being rich. There's nothing wrong with spending a little money on yourself. The problem came in with Lazarus, that here was a man sitting at his doorpost day after day, and Divus did nothing for him. He never reached out once to help him at all. He kept all of his money to himself. He was selfish and didn't care that this man was in need. Maybe he even addressed him and says, go out and get a job or something like that. Who knows what happened there? Now, we probably can imagine that Divus could have taken care of all Lazarus's needs by the interest alone that he raised on the money that he probably put with bankers. And of course, when they both die, Lazarus is taken to the bosom of Abraham, and Divus is in torment. And look what happens there. He sees Abraham and with Lazarus there, and he wants Lazarus to dip his finger in water and quench his thirst. He wants Lazarus to do something for him that he never did for Lazarus a single day in his life. And we might cut him some slack. We might say, well, maybe Divus never really saw Lazarus there. Maybe he was just, in everything he did, just never noticed this poor man was out there. Except in the parable, when he sees him, he doesn't say, Father Abraham, who is that guy with you? Or, I think I've seen that guy before. Didn't I see him once or twice outside my house? No, he says, Father Abraham, send Lazarus to dip his finger in water. He knows him by name. So therefore, there's no excuse for Divus. He knew who Lazarus was. He knew he was in need, and he could have brought him out of his need, and he did nothing to help him. And that was why he was condemned, because of his selfishness, because he could have helped someone else and didn't do it. And now when the situation was reversed, he wanted Lazarus to help him. And we see in this parable a wonderful divine justice, that the Lord says to him basically, how can you expect somebody to do for you what you refuse to do for someone else? And it's a very basic question, but it's also a question that makes me squirm, because I have to ask myself in all honesty, how many times have I known I could have helped somebody else and didn't do it? And I have to stand convicted before the Lord and say, I was not there when somebody needed me. Whether it was financially, whether it was giving money, or giving time, or giving attention to someone, whatever it may be. I know I have to stand and accuse myself of not being perfect when it comes to that. And so all of us have to ask ourselves the very same question. Have we ever not been there for somebody for whom we could easily have been there? And of course, the general thrust of this is also about finances, of being there financially to help the poor. Pope Francis never tires to tell the story of immediately after he was elected Pope in conclave, when they had enough votes to elect him. One of the Brazilian cardinals was sitting next to him, and he turned and whispered into his ear, "Don't forget the poor." And because of that, he took the name Francis, remembering Francis of Assisi, who was so concerned about the poor throughout his life. And that's been one of the main topics of Pope Francis's preaching, of reaching out to the poor. And we here often do have plenty of opportunities to help the poor. We could say, like Dives, maybe we could say, well, Dives knew Lazarus was there, but there is no poor person sitting outside my door. And we'd be absolutely right. I have never in my 11 years here walked out of the rectory in the morning and found a homeless person sitting on my doorstep. I've never found it. But we know here in Yonkers and in New York City and other areas around, there are people who are poor that need our help. And it is definitely true that we have to be discerning, because some of the homelessness and poverty in our time is of a little different nature. It's not always the same as in Jesus' time, of people who just had no money and had no jobs and had to live on the street. We do know that some of the people who are homeless, who are living in the streets, are not actually poor. They do have homes and they do have even money in the bank, but because of psychiatric reasons, whatever it may be, they're living in the gutters. And sometimes they have family who are looking for them. And so maybe the better thing to do would be for societies or organizations to connect them with their families or help them get the help they need to not be living in the street. That is definitely true of some. And then, of course, we know when there are societies that reach out to us looking for help. There are many very legitimate societies that we know are doing a wonderful job to help people who are poor, who are sick. My heart goes out to things such as St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, when you see children with cancer, or so many of the other things that you see on the TV that break your heart to see people like that and you want to help. But we have to be discerning, because unfortunately, while many of them are legitimate, there are also frauds out there. There are people who try to play on our emotions and our compassion for people who are poor and try to get us to give money to them to help the poor, and not a dollar of it is ever going near anybody who is poor. I think one of the saddest chapters of what happened in the wake of 9/11 was the number of people who came out fraudulently trying to raise money to assist families of victims of 9/11 and first responders. And we quickly discovered they were just frauds going out and getting money from people and putting it in their own pockets. And sadly, people do that. They pass themselves off as charities, as missionaries in so many different places. And so we have to do our homework before we give to somebody. I promise you here, anybody that comes into St. Anne's, we have well vetted. So when we do the Giving Tree every year with either Cross Catholic or Food for the Poor, and they come in usually in February to speak for us, they are legitimate organizations, and you can feel free to give to them to the best of your ability. Whenever in the summertime we have the mission appeal, where they will send an order in, they present all of their credentials to the Archdiocese beforehand to make sure they are truly people working in the mission somewhere in other parts of the world, so that we can be sure when we're giving money to them, the money is going to the people for whom it is intended. So yes, we have to be a little bit alert, and we can't just automatically give to every single thing that we get in the mail or in an email, especially emails, because they're the easiest places to set up bogus charities. But nevertheless, do your homework, and then make sure we're giving appropriately to charity, because that is our duty as Christians. I know sometimes we have to be very delicate when it comes to fundraising. We have a lot of eager groups here that want to raise money. Our teenagers are always trying to raise money for us, and you're very generous with them. And then there's Knights of Columbus do fundraising to give to charities, and then there's outside groups that come in and always asking for charity. And you are always very generous with that. I can say that. In all honesty before the Lord, I can defend you and say the people of St. Anne's are extremely generous when it comes to helping people who come looking for money. Is that true of every individual in the parish? I can't say that. I don't know. Only you would know if you are among them. I do know, I hear the gossip that sometimes goes around, that sometimes people say, oh, Father Carrozza only talks about money. Well, that's certainly not true. You know very well I don't always talk about money. One Sunday a year, I talk about our finances. And when we are bringing somebody in to talk about charity or give to something, well, that's what we should be doing as Christians. From time to time, we need to be reaching out charitably to others with what we can to help people who are less fortunate than ourselves. And I remember some years back when we first started doing the giving tree for, instead of just for local charities where we said, some of them are going to people who are just a little poorer than we are. Remembering Mother Teresa of Calcutta, when she came to the United States, she said, but you don't really have true poverty here in the United States. You have relative poverty. You have people who don't have as much as other people do. She says, but what you call poor in many other countries would be the middle class. Until she went to Appalachia and the Indian reservations, and she said, oh no, here in America, you do have some real poverty. So anything dealing with charities in Appalachia, like Habitat for Humanity, people who are building homes in Appalachia, or anything that's dealing with the Indian reservations, that's real poverty there. But then I decided one year, this was after the hurricane that had hit Haiti, and we got news that people had lost their homes in the hurricane, and they had never been rebuilt. And they were living behind pieces of plastic strung around poles, or behind lean-tos made of corrugated metal or cardboard. And it would broke our heart to see that these are people who are living subject to the elements, and they have no way of bringing themselves out of this poverty, because Haiti is probably the poorest country in the world. So we decided that year to do houses for Haiti, and you were very generous. We raised the money that first year, I think, to build 2 houses for 2 families in Haiti, and they sent us pictures of the houses afterwards, which we displayed in the back of the church, so that we could see where our money made a difference. But I do remember one year on Christmas Eve, some man coming up to me and saying, Father, that's really nice that we're taking care of people in Haiti and other places that are in need. But what about the people right around us? Charity begins at home. What are you doing about people right here in Yonkers that are in need? And I said to him, well, that's what we deal with through the Cardinal's Appeal. Catholic Charities, which is very active in our area, which helps many poor people in New York, in Yonkers, in our own area. The majority of the money from Catholic Charities comes from what we give every spring in the Cardinal's Appeal. Do you give to the Cardinal's Appeal? And of course he looked at me like he did not know what the Cardinal's Appeal was. So, when the Cardinal's Appeal comes around, remember, one of the great charities that we help with that is Catholic Charities, right here to help people here at home. And so I always remind you when that comes around to be as generous as we can to help the people who are in need here. The Lord indeed does challenge us today that we have to be concerned for the needs of the poor. It must never be an extraction from people. So any government or any society that would try to assess us and put a toll on us and say, you must pay this, or going to steal it out of our bank accounts, well, no, that's wrong. That is sinful. It must always be a gift from us. And so we encourage people to give. But as St. Paul says, we must always be giving freely from the desire in our heart to help people who are less fortunate than we are. And as Jesus reminds us, whatever we do for the least of our brothers, we do for him. And so today, let's reflect upon our own lives, whether it's our financial charity, spending time with other people, helping them out when they need it, maybe giving them attention, concern, care, picking up the phone and calling somebody who maybe we know is lonely and needs somebody just to look in on them after a while. All the different ways we can talk of being charitable to those who are in need. Let's ask the Lord today to help us to see the situations that sometimes we don't see. But if we look a little bit, we will find. And may we find them and indeed serve the Lord by serving those who are in need, knowing that if we do that, the Lord will bring us into the glory of his kingdom, and we will be seated not in the bosom of Abraham, but in the bosom of Christ himself. May Jesus Christ be praised. And the timing, of course, for this is absolutely perfect today because we have a second collection. And you may have noticed one of our people up here sitting with the altar servers looks a little bit too old to be an altar server. And if you think he's too old to be an altar server, it's because he is. He's not our altar server, he's our seminarian. Joseph Ukai, who is a parishioner here at St. Anne's, has been in the college seminary for the past 4 years. And this year he started First Theology next door at St. Joseph's Seminary. And I'm very happy to have Joseph with us today. And a couple of weeks ago, they called me from the seminary saying on the Sunday when the seminary collection is taken out, they send out all the seminarians to talk in one of the parishes about life in the seminary and encouraging them to give. And he says, can we send you your own seminarian, Joseph Ukai? And I said, with pleasure. So at this point, Joseph, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, and they're all yours. Be kind to him. We need seminarians.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me. As Father mentioned, I'm from this parish. I'm from Yonkers. This is where I first started going to Mass, willingly, that is. And so this parish means a lot to me. I consider the parishioners my family, the parish my home. So I have no problem asking for money. So a little bit about the seminary. St. Joseph's was built about 120 years ago or so, and it's one of the most prominent seminaries in the country, actually. I have some of my classmates are from Burma, Vietnam. They come from all over the world, not just to study and stay here. They actually go back to their own diocese and to serve there. So they're sent here because the seminary is that good. And in order to make it that good, we need a lot of resources. So we have some of the best professors in the country. Actually, we have a lot of assets. We have a full-time psychologist, believe it or not, that costs a lot of money. We're making good use of him, and just to feed everyone, there's about 90 seminarians there. To feed everyone costs a lot of money. To heat the building is very expensive, and just different events that we have, like speakers coming in to train us on different things, and countless other things to just help us to become good seminarians and become good priests. Train us to become the best priests that we can be to serve the people of God. So I appreciate anything you can contribute. Thank you so much. I know you're always generous. And besides the financial help, I know you're always praying. I hope you're all praying for me and for more vocations. That's even more important. So I thank you all.
Joseph, I can assure you you're in our prayers every day. And if there's anybody else who's young out there who was thinking God might want you to be a priest, talk to Joseph. He will tell you it is the most beautiful life in the world. Together, let us profess our faith.